Hi everyone, my name is Shrey Jain, and I'm the product lead for the Healthcare Multi-Agent Orchestrator within the Health and Life Sciences team at Microsoft. The Healthcare Multi-Agent Orchestrator is a modular, multi-agent template designed to accelerate cancer care through multimodal research agents. Each agent combines a general-purpose reasoning model, healthcare specialized models from Azure AI Foundry, access to public data from the internet and private knowledge, and finally tools available within Microsoft 365. These agents support complex, multimodal reasoning grounded in clinical data, enabling real-time support for multidisciplinary tumor boards and oncology workflows. They can be deployed into productivity tools already used by cancer care teams, such as Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Teams, and Copilot, or integrated into custom user experiences. We show how you can make these agents available through exposing an MCP server to enable interoperability with Copilot Studio, as well as third-party agents. At Microsoft Build 2025, we'll debut a series of specialized agents designed to streamline high-impact cancer care tasks. This includes helping generate a patient timeline, staging cancer, reviewing radiology, clinical trials matching, finding the most relevant literature from research, and finally creating a summary of the patient's profile in a Word document. These agents incorporate Microsoft research innovations and partner contributions. To accelerate the development in the healthcare ecosystem, we provide agent code samples on Azure AI Foundry that abstracts the infrastructure setup. Developers can deploy these agents with access to clinically grounded data sources, domain-specific safeguards, and pre-integrated tools with the Healthcare Agent Service. We've been excited to see leading cancer care institutions test and evaluate these tools that you can read more about in our blog. By simplifying the deployment, orchestration, and integration into clinical workflows, the Healthcare Multi-Agent Orchestrator aims to empower developers to build trustworthy, multimodal AI agents that fit naturally into real-world healthcare environments. In today's session, you're going to hear from three of my colleagues. The first will be 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗶ie, who's a general manager of the Real-World Evidence Group within Microsoft Research Health Futures, to talk about the core research within Microsoft that informs this work. Then we're going to have Sam Preston, who's one of the lead scientists within Health and Life Sciences, talk about how we integrated that research into the agents you're going to see today. And finally, Will Guyman, a group product manager within Health and Life Sciences, who's going to touch on how the Azure AI Foundry makes it easier to build agents and models, followed by a deployment of myself showing how we're going to take these agents and integrate them into teams. I'm going to hand it off to 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 to get us started.
Thanks, Jay. I'm 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, General Manager at Health Future in Microsoft Research, leading the real-world evidence research program. As we all know, cancer is a complex disease, and cancer care requires sophisticated coordination across many specialties, from radiology, pathology, and genomics in diagnosis to surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, targeted therapy, and the latest immunotherapy in treatment decision-making. To navigate such complexities, top cancer center would form a so-called tumor board by convening essentially a bunch of specialists in a war room to deliberate on the patient case and the optimal treatment pathways. Also, when the standard of care fail, which unfortunately happen a lot of time in cancer, the tumor board will also review active clinical trial for which the patient might be eligible. Such a personal care can drastically improve the chance of survival for the patient. So this is promising, but as biomedicine continues to advance by leaps and bounds, we remain, unfortunately, far, far away from being able to democratize the best care to everyone. For example, each year, there are 20 million new cancer patients worldwide and 2 million new cancer patients in the US alone. Tumor board is extremely expensive and time-consuming, and the top cancer center can only review a handful of patients in their tumor board. Moreover, even in the US, only 15% of cancer patients are treated in such a comprehensive cancer center, whereas the vast majority of 85% of patients are treated in a community or rural hospital that doesn't even have a tumor board. In clinical trial, only a tiny fraction of cancer patients were able to find a matching trial, whereas many trials fail simply because they couldn't find enough patients in time. So in the long run, technology can be a powerful democratizing force, and that Microsoft Research, we have been researching AI for precision health for well over a decade, with tumor board being the marquee scenario, motivating our research from the very beginning. With an amazing team and wonderful collaborators, we have made a lot of progress. For example, together with Providence Health and University of Washington, we have developed GigaPath, the world's first pathology foundation model that can scale transformer to gigapixel host-like images. The GigaPath paper was published by the top journal Nature, and the GigaPath model has been downloaded for over 1 million times across the globe. By using text as interlingua, we have developed advanced multimodal methods such as Biomed parse that can bridge 9 imaging modalities and 64 object types through a natural language interface, essentially enabling user to conduct holistic analysis by talking to an image. By harnessing frontier AI, we have developed advanced methods for structuring patient data and conducting clinical trial matching at scale. And we are very excited to see initial success of end-to-end application in empowering partners such as large health systems and life sciences companies. In healthcare multi-agent orchestrator, we are thrilled to see that our close collaborators at Azure Health and Life Sciences are able to take the most mature research advances, such as some of the cutting-edge imaging model and some of the medical abstraction and trial matching capabilities, orchestrate them through a modern agentic system, and put them into the hands of developers, data scientists, and clinicians, with tumor board being the initial reference scenario for democratizing high-quality precision healthcare for everyone. We are really looking forward to the feedback from the community and seeing more research advances becoming available to everyone in real-world applications. So next, I will pass on to Sam Preston, who will go over some of the implementation details.
Thanks, Hui-Feng. I'm Sam Preston, an applied scientist in the Health and Life Sciences organization working on the Healthcare Multi-Agent Orchestrator. Let's take a closer look at how the work that Hui-Feng discussed is mapped into individual agents that support the molecular tumor board. The Data Organizer agent applies the universal medical abstraction technology from Microsoft Research to a core set of data elements that inform the molecular tumor board discussions. Obvious items such as cancer diagnosis and staging, prior treatments and outcomes, and genetic biomarkers are organized as background information, as well as elements such as the patient's latest health status and their expressed treatment wishes. Based on universal medical abstraction, all of these are grounded back into the patient's clinical notes to ensure factuality and verifiability. The agents can also review the patient's medical records to answer real-time questions that might not be covered by the initial summary. This allows immediate answers to questions that would otherwise require review beyond what would be possible in a live meeting. Beyond answering questions from the medical records, the clinical trials agent can take patients' organized information and determine clinical trials they may qualify for based on up-to-date inclusion or exclusion criteria. We're hoping that the tumor board scenario provides a template for how developers can reduce the burden on clinicians and allow more informed, real-time discussions and recommendations by incorporating domain-specific agents. I'll now hand it over to Will.
Thanks, Sam. I'm Will Guyman, a group product manager in the Health and Life Sciences team in AI Frontiers. And I'd like to talk about how you as a developer can build on top of the AI that Sam and Hui-Feng talked about in the Azure AI Foundry. The Foundry is available at ai.azure.com, and it's the same Foundry that you can use to build on top of the generic AI models, like the models from OpenAI or Meta. But there's also an industry filter in Foundry, and you can filter to domain-specialized models for health and life sciences. And this is a collection of models, both that we built at Microsoft using the datasets that we had access to, models that we worked with partners with their data and expertise to build, as well as models from third parties like Page AI, who have their own specialized datasets and specialized models. And as a developer, you can use any of these models in your Azure subscription and customize them. So let's take a look. The MedImage Parse model was already talked about as one of these models that can work across various data types in healthcare: radiology, pathology, dermatology, ophthalmology, and more. And this model made nature because it integrates recognition, segmentation, and detection. And you can see on the model card how the model was architected, what data was used to train it, and how we evaluated it, including fairness testing. If you're signed into the Foundry, you'll see this deploy button where you can deploy the model on an Azure GPU VM, and then you'll get a HIPAA-compliant API endpoint in your Azure subscription. So I've already gone ahead and done that. So now I'm going to jump over to the playground just to test out this model and get a sense of what it's capable of. So in the healthcare playground, I already have this MedImageParse deployment. And now I'm going to test it on a pathology slide. A pathology slide is a small sample of the tissue, in this case that's been digitized. And it's useful to identify if there are any cancerous cells in this particular example. So we'll look and actually ask, are there any cancerous cells? And this model can understand what that means, look in the image, and then segment out those cancerous cells in red. And this is useful for both identifying the presence of a potential disease, but also looking at the size of these diseases, which can be used for determining the stage of cancer that you're in. But this model is multimodal, so you can also use it on other modalities like endoscopes. Endoscopes are useful because colon cancer is one of the most common and deadly cancers. And again, you can look in this modality to see if there are polyps, also known as signs of cancerous lesions in this image. And so we're going to ask and look for neoplastic or cancerous and non-neoplastic or benign polyps. So here we can see in red, we did find an abnormal, potentially cancerous neoplastic polyp that we call lesion. And then in blue on the right, we see a non-neoplastic or benign polyp. So this was just an evaluation, a quick test of a few images. But typically, if you're building on these models, you want to run a larger scale evaluation and potentially fine-tune this model on your specific data set for your specific task. And you can do that in Azure ML with our fine-tuning notebook. This notebook shows you how to set up your data, fine-tune the model, and then evaluate the results. So in this case, we're going to stick with that endoscope modality and use the public gastrovision dataset, which has many classes, including colon polyps, to look at indications of lesions or cancer. And so you can see, just if scroll down, here's some example images from that dataset. So now I can jump back to the notebook, and you'll notice there's some sample code here to set up the data. In this case, it's a link to the various images, and for each image, there's a text label or a series of classes. And we can jump forward and actually go ahead and fine-tune that model, and that can take between 15 minutes to a couple of hours, depending on how big your data set is and how you configured the job. But we will show eventually how you can monitor that job and then look at the evaluation, the results of that job. Now, I've already run a job, so I'll jump over to that metrics page. And because in this case, we're trying to build a classifier to reliably determine whether there's a lesion or not, we've picked a bunch of classification metrics to look at. And you can see how the accuracy, the curves are growing. And so the accuracy is getting better and better as the model has been fine-tuned. And so we can scroll down and look at these various classification curves. I'm going to pick this one, which is very common in the machine learning community, the mean area under the curve accuracy. But this is a nice balance between sensitivity and specificity. And you can see on the x-axis, as we increase the steps, we get more and more accuracy until it starts to plateau at around 0.98. And this is great because now as a developer, I can tweak the sensitivity or specificity and really optimize for one or the other, depending on my particular use case. So we've seen how you can use the Azure Machine Learning Notebook that we've built to fine-tune this classifier, deploy that in your subscription, test it out in the playground, and now you can use these models and agents, and Shrey is going to show you how.
Thank you, Will, for showing us how we can interact with models in Azure AI Foundry. Now let's do the same with agents. So here I'm showing various different agents, and let's look at what it means to play with one of these agents in a playground-like experience. What I can do as a developer to get a sense of how the agent works is I can pass a sample query here. For instance, create a patient timeline. for patient ID, patient 4, a sample patient we have loaded here. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see all the different parameters which I as a developer can edit to amend this different agent, such as the instructions, the knowledge, and the different tools it has access to. And on the left-hand side of the screen, we're getting a feel for what that agent's outputs could look like. And so what we're seeing is how it's interacting with the patient's data to then create a chronological timeline of the patient's history. And we're seeing a presentation of that timeline here in the chat. Now that I've got a feel for a single agent, I want to understand what it looks like to play with multiple agents. And so if I go to the code sample part of the agents tab, that's where I'm going to find the healthcare multi-agent orchestrator. And on that page, I can find the GitHub where I can start to figure out how to deploy and orchestrate these agents. When I click on that GitHub link, this is the page I'll be presented with, where I'm going to get the overall architecture of how the orchestration works, along with all the prerequisite and developer requirements on how to deploy the agents, and finally the installation guide. What I've done for simplicity is pre-created a Codespaces environment where we're going to walk through how you deploy these agents, customize them, and integrate them into teams. And so the first place I'm going to start, after you've done your login, and I've assumed that you've done that step already, is we're going to do the azd deploy command. Once we do the azd deploy command, what's happening is we're setting up all the agents such that they can be loaded into the different places in which we want to deploy them. One place, for instance, is Microsoft Teams, and so that's what we're going to show now. Now that the application is finished being deployed, let's look at the resources that have been deployed for this application. So I can go to my Azure portal and see the deployment details to view all the resources. And if I click on the resource group, I want to show you specifically how the resources connect back into Azure AI Foundry. So if I click on the project here, and I'm able to go to the Studio Web URL, what I'm going to find is a place that brings me into Foundry and actually shows me for this specific deployment all the models and endpoints that were deployed. And so as Will showed earlier, all the specific health and life sciences models, we've now shown you how we've made it really easy to deploy those models connected to your agents. And I'm going to walk you through how they're connected to your agents in more detail. And so, for instance, this is our chest x-ray model, our imaging embeddings model, and our segmentation model. Now that I have all of my resources deployed, I want to show you how I can integrate the sample agents that we've built into Teams. So let's walk through what that script looks like. Now I'm going to run the script to deploy these agents into Teams. And so to do that, I'm going to write the scripts/upload package.sh output with the meeting ID. And what's happening now is these agents are actually going to be deployed into my Teams environment. And so now if I go to Teams, I can find where these agents have been added into a specific tumor board meeting. Imagine this is a tumor board that we're preparing for that's happening later today. So I can ask, for instance, Biomed, please create a tumor board review for patient ID, patient_4. And what's going to happen is that Biomed's going to create a plan with all the other agents in order to explain how it's going to execute all the different actions that are needed to prepare for a tumor board meeting. And under the hood, the way that Biomed works as an orchestration layer agent is that it's connected to all these individual agents, like our data organizing agent, our radiology agent, and our pathology agent, to be able to know what agent to call when, as well as knowing what agents need to be called on based on the user's prompt. And we think this is a really valuable asset for developers to have a more flexible multi-agent system. So here, for instance, you can look at Biomed created a plan with all the different agents where it said we're going to start by obtaining the patient timeline, and then it's going to go through the radiology, the pathology, determine the current status of the patient, go through the treatment, clinical trials, and finally a summary. And, this looks good to me, but maybe as an oncologist or as a clinical researcher, I want to add a step. So what I can do to Biomed is say, Biomed, please add a step to add relevant research papers related to the current medications and treatments this patient has taken. And what's going to happen is Biomed's going to respond to me as the user to create a more flexible plan that incorporates my feedback. And we should see that here accordingly. And so now what we're seeing reflected here is the updated plan with the research agent included in this. And so if this looks good to me as the user, I can then move forward on executing this plan and letting Biomed proceed with all the relevant actions. And so what Biomed here is asking, user, can you confirm this updated plan? And if this looks good, it's going to execute and move forward. And this is something where we allow a human in the loop to be in place, and the developer can choose when the human is needed. Or for more offline scripts, you can have the agents call one another without a human. And so I can say, Biomed, proceed. This plan looks good. And so now Biomed's going to go to work, and it's going to start calling all these different agents to create that tumor board report. So now you can see Biomed started to produce an output with the first agent, the data organizing agent. And if you recall, this was actually the agent we were testing in Foundry with that individual playground-like experience. So I, as a developer, can get a first feel in Foundry for what it looks like before it goes to these clinical workflows where the clinician already sits, like in Teams. So let's say I, as the oncologist, am looking at this timeline where I'm seeing the key points of the agent's outputs, which is, for instance, the initial presentation, a follow-up CT scan, but maybe I don't trust the AI model. So what I can do is I can actually click on the source, and when I pull up that source, I'm actually going to see highlighted where from the clinical note that agent's output was taken from. And that's something we've noticed clinicians find really valuable. As we scroll down, we're going to see all the different parts of that chronological timeline that the agent has created, and it's going to actually highlight the key points as well as the notes that were referenced in order to create that bullet point. So then what happens is that the radiology model gets called, and what the radiology model is doing is it's going and reviewing the imaging for this patient and comparing it against the AI, the human reports, and seeing if there's any discrepancies. And so what you're seeing here is that the radiology agent is using the CXR report gen model. And if you recall, that was the model that was deployed in AI Foundry that we showed earlier, and is now being integrated and showing the outputs directly in Teams. Again, we want to emphasize the fact that this is all happening in Teams is something that's really valuable for the tumor board workflow, where these collaboration workspaces already take place. So now this is the next part where we're showing the pathology integration. And this is a third-party agent where we've worked on with Paige AI. Paige AI is a pathology company that's building leading AI and pathology tools. And so we've shown how we could take their agent, Alba, and integrate into our demo. And we're seeing the relevant pathology outputs that they need to communicate to the oncologist related to this patient, such as the relevant biomarkers, as well as NPV and PPV values for the known biomarkers. Next, the Biomed agent is going to call on the patient status agent. And the patient status agent is used to pull the most recent profile of the agent. That is needed to be able to align it to recent clinical trials as well as medical guidelines. Let's look at what the output has to show here. So let's look at what the patient status did. It actually talked between Biomed and the data organizer to say it actually needed more information in order to address the question it had. So it called back on another agent, showing that multi-agent communication that's happening in order to address the question. And in this case, it asks for the patient's age, gender, staging, primary site, histology, biomarkers, and history. Now that we're ready for the treatment agent, let's look at what this looks like. So the data organizer and the treatment agent are working together to figure out what information is missing in order to align it to the most recent medical guidelines, such as the NCCN guideline. Now that it has all the information it needs, it walks through what the recommendation is based on the guideline. And it's showing here how it's walking through that decision-making, the flow, and actually lining to the specific page in the clinical guideline that it has access to. Then what's happening is it's going to use the current patient profile, what's stated in the guidelines, and identifying if there's any clinical trials that this patient is eligible for. And what it does is it actually links out to the specific clinical trials that the patient is eligible for on clinicaltrials.gov, and you can find those different studies here, and also provides an explanation as to why they're eligible or not. And you can interact with these agents as well, as I'll show in a moment here. Finally, it's going to do some research and figure out if there's any relevant papers. Sometimes there's no relevant papers, and you can manage the index of as the developer for what those papers look like. And now we can get a Word document that summarizes the agent's outputs, such as the clinical and pathology summary, the medical history, the social history, a chronological timeline, as well as the radiology and pathology. We're using this as a source of truth that the oncologist can then use, for instance, to transform into a PowerPoint and bring back into the meeting, or create common knowledge over the case. But that's not where the journey ends. Let's say I wanted to ask one of the individual agents, for instance, the data organizing agent, create a table of all the labs and medications this patient has taken, ordered by date. And what we want to show you is that you can interact either with the broad orchestration agent to ask these longer, more complex queries, or you can interact with these individual agents directly in Teams to ask these questions. And so here we can show you what, for instance, the data organizing agent is capable of doing with these more complex queries. And so now we're seeing the output of that query that I had, which is a table of all the labs and medications ordered by date, where it's specifying the date, lab, and the description. Again, you as a developer can choose how you want to format this, and it's going to be grounded in the clinical notes. Now that I've shown how we interact with the agents in Teams, let's go back and look at how we edit these agents. So if I go to my agents.yaml file under the config, under the scenarios, under source folder in the repository, I'm able to see how these different agents are defined. And what I want to do is just walk through how we define, for instance, the radiology agent. So here, I define the name of the agent, the instructions it has. And in here, you can think of this as a system prompt, as well as the tools that the agent can call. So in this case, with the radiology agent, we're showing how it can call the CXR report gen. And that's the chest x-ray model that we've deployed on AI Foundry. And finally, we have a description of the agent that lets other agents, as well as in Teams, the human, know what this agent does. So here you see the CXR report gen. Let's look at what the CXR report gen tool looks like in code. So I can go to the tools folder, and there's a one-to-one mapping between the tool name and the file here, where if I walk through this, you can see that we've defined a class CXR report gen plugin, where we have a decorator that identifies to the agent that this is a tool that it can call. And we have a general description of the input and output requirements of this specific tool. And what we see in the description here is a connection to the endpoint that we've deployed on Azure AI Foundry for this model. And this is just one of many examples of how you connect the agent to a tool that it can call, and in this case, for a multimodal model. So what we've walked through now is how to deploy the healthcare multi-agent orchestrator, how to integrate it into Teams, show you some sample queries of interacting with the agents, briefly outline how you look at the agent definition and the tools. And now I want to talk through how we can integrate with different extensibility tools. For instance, like the healthcare agent service. The healthcare agent service offers things like clinical safeguards and grounding in clinical data sources. And the way in which we've shown how you can integrate there is by adding your agents.yaml file to have a definition that specifies that you want to have the healthcare agent service offering defined as true. That then will allow you to take you to the healthcare agent service portal and show you sample templates where we've deployed different versions of these agents there. For instance, we could look at the radiology agent, where we can see how we can import that template, show how we can get clinical safeguards and grounding into clinical data sources, all while being connected to our imaging models. We also have some sample code that you'll find in our blogs related to how we've extended this beyond the tumor board workflow to things like radiology and other scenarios. This is just the first illustration of how you can get started with Healthcare Multi-Agent Orchestrator. And so today we saw a sample implementation of how we were able to play with the Healthcare Multi-Agent Orchestrator. We started with the research that informed this sample code from Microsoft Research and 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀. We then showed how we could take that research and transfer it into the sample code from Sam Preston with the things like data organizing agents and clinical trials. Then we had Will Guyman show in Foundry how you could edit models and test these agents. And now we finally showed you how you could take those agents, deploy them, integrate them into Teams, edit them, connect them to tools, and more. We're really excited about where the future of this can go and how we can enable developers to build multimodal agents into clinical workflows. If you have any other questions, please look to our blog and documentation and don't hesitate to reach out. We're really excited about the future of development of these agents in cancer care. Thank you.